Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're going to have a look at a beer from another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So as I've told you in previous reviews, there's somewhere in the region of 750 different Swedish microbreweries these days, and you can find some real gems amongst these really small and unknown breweries in fact. So I always try to make the effort to introduce at least 2 or 3 new little Swedish breweries here on the channel every month. And it's time for one of those reviews today. So for this one, we are going to head a little bit north once again. We're going to go to the Mariestad area, and Mariestad you will find on the kind of southeastern bank of Lake Vänern, the larger of the 2 big lakes, kind of in the southern part of Sweden, to the northeast of Gothenburg, Göteborg. Supposed to be a very beautiful part of the country actually, so I'll need to go and check that out sometime. But yeah, we are going to go to Torsöl Mikrobryggeri for the very first time. So this particular beer is called the Cigna Double Ipa. It comes in at 7.7% ABV, and this beer was released as part of the Lokal och Småskalig assortment through Systembolaget here in Sweden for March of 2021. So yeah, my very first encounter with this brewery. I have to say I'm very curious about what they have on offer for us because of the story behind them. And yeah, fingers crossed this makes for another interesting beer, and I hope that you guys enjoy my take on it as well. So yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that hopefully I can do in the future from Torsöl Mikrobryggeri. Very first time I'm trying one of their beers, as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The whole channel of course has a geography based tagging system, so you can go into the homepage and search for beer based on country, city, state, county, province, prefecture, whatever it is you happen to be interested in. Do check out the playlists of beers from different countries. There is one there for all the Swedish beers that I've reviewed for you. That's constantly being added to, and as always, please do get in touch and let me know some of the other beers and breweries that you guys would like to see me review. It's always great to hear from you guys that are watching the videos, and the support that you show the channel is hugely appreciated. So anyway, to tell you a little bit about Torsöl Mikrobryggeri then, on to my brewery notes. So Torsöl Brewery, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in the Mariestad area, and the company is owned by Professor P.J. Larsen. So apparently he started brewing Gotlandstrike after discovering it in Gotland in the 1980s, but he didn't think it tasted that great, but he learned how to brew it anyway when he moved to Skövde a few years later, but he soon made the jump to beer. But for those of you who don't know, Gotlandstrike is quite an interesting thing. It's a sort of farmhousey, smoky, junipery type ale thing. It's unpasteurized of course, and it doesn't travel very well, which is why there's not too many examples of it outside of Gotland. But it's also quite similar to the Finnish lattes as well actually. I think the Estonians actually have something similar from what I remember. So yeah, it's a sort of farmhousey, smoky, junipery type thing. I would recommend you try it if you get the chance, because it is quite unique, but it's a bit of an acquired taste. I would say that. I quite like it because of the smokiness, but you know, other people, it might take you a little bit longer to kind of get used to it if you like. But yeah, at the time that P.J. was in Skövde, he was actually researching microbiology, and he used to discuss brewing quite often with one of his colleagues, and they agreed that it would be quite an interesting thing when they retired to start up a microbrewery. But at this point in time they were quite far away from their retirement. I don't think it was until about 2020 that P.J. actually retired. But in the 1980s in Sweden it was very popular to drink different wines, but there wasn't a huge variety of different beers available through Systembolaget. But basically P.J. started brewing beer after getting a hold of some malt from Aroma on Gotland, and apparently he would buy a 25 kilogram bag of this each year when he visited his summer house, and this would last him the whole year. But he cultivated yeast from Scottish and Danish bottles, and then he got hops from one of his neighbour's gardens apparently. But he would also boil wort on his stove. His brewing story is quite interesting actually. He would boil the wort on his stove, and then he would ferment the beer on his heated tile floor. So yeah, quite an inventive way to do a little bit of home brewing and control the temperature. But later he moved to an agricultural property near Mariestad, and at this point he came into contact with Oxhornet, which is a home brewing club, and this helped him build his knowledge quite a lot. But he started Torsöl officially as a company in 2013. It's 7 years before he retired in 2020. But the name is taken from the island of Torsöl, which can be seen from Mariestad itself. It's kind of on the southern part of Lake Venern, as I mentioned earlier, but he grows his own hops on this agricultural property as well. There's a few different varieties. So apparently there's Maurits, Huda Norgård, and also Bunnerod as well. So it's quite interesting that we're getting a few different varieties of Swedish hops these days as well. I wouldn't have thought that it would be possible to grow hops that far north in Sweden, come to think of it. So that's a really interesting thing to know. But basically his first beers were sold to a local restaurant, and then he started selling them through Systembolaget in 2016. But he started off with a brew kit of around 400 litres, and they have upgraded that, I think, quite significantly over the last few years. But as of March 2021, when I'm filming this review for you, they produced around 20 different kinds of beer, and unless I'm mistaken, this might be the first one that they've released through the Lokal Småskaligt. So yeah, as I say, I could be mistaken about that, but this was the first time that I saw the name Torsöl in the local list, and that's what I do with these kind of very small Swedish breweries, is I just look through the list for different styles and names that I don't recognise, and usually I pick up something from the different breweries, and that was what happened with this one. I think there was a couple of different beers available from these guys, but this was just the one that kind of struck my eye actually. So yeah, caught my eye, I should say, not struck my eye. My brain's getting bad these days because I'm learning Swedish at the same time and trying to speak English on these videos too. Not so good. But yeah, that's all I can really tell you about Torsöl Mikrobryggeri for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn more about all of the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's get on and actually have a taste of this beer then. So as you can see, the artwork on this one is quite nice. It is a little bit retro actually. I think it's pretty cool. You can see the background of this label here is actually a map showing you where Torsö is, and of course the name of the brewery is just a kind of play on Torsöl basically. But yeah, it says on the side here, this double IPA is our most hopped beer with, among other things, Citra, Mosaic and Simcoe, but it even contains our Swedish cultivated, Swedish grown, Svensk odlade Maurits 85 humle. So yeah, the Maurits 85 variety hop. But it says on the side here, Cigna is an ancient or old Swedish, an old Nordic girl's name that means new things basically. So in the world of fairy tales, Cigna is like the king's daughter that loves everyone and everyone loves her. I think that's what it's saying. Swedish, the grammar, there's not as many words in Swedish, if you like, as there are in English. Their verb system works better, but sometimes they've not got as many articles and things like that in Swedish. So sometimes it's hard to interpret a little bit exactly what it means, but I think it's basically saying that, yeah, in the world of fairy tales, Cigna means the king's daughter that loves everyone who loves her, maybe? She loves everyone that loves her. So yeah, I think that's what it means. But it also tells you on the side here a little bit about Torsöl as well. It says Torsöl Mikrobryggeri strives to use local produced raw ingredients, and you can see a little bit more about this at our website or on Facebook. But this beer is unpasteurized, which means that it can build up on the bottom side. So I think that's just meaning that some sediment can build up in the bottom actually. So yeah, this one, as I say, that's all you really need to know about the beer itself. 440ml can. I think I paid roughly about 45 Swedish kroners for this. So for those of you watching in different places, that's about €4.50, about £4 sterling, and I guess about $5.25 American. So yeah, plain top on the can. Let's get it out and we'll get on with the tasting then. Curious to see what it has in store for us. So I'm curious about this. The hop that's in this one as well, that Maurits 85. So yeah, and probably what he's done, if PA is a microbiologist, probably what he's done is he's bred these hops himself a little bit. So it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. What he maybe needs to do then is release a few single hop beers with these different varieties, but the question would be whether he's producing the hops on a big enough scale to do that. But to do some single hop beers with those different hop varieties he has would be quite interesting, of course. But yeah, I'm not sure whether this one is going to be... This one, it says on the side here, that this one has barley malt and wheat malt in it. And I was just thinking it looks a little bit more like a kind of West Coaster, to be honest with you, but it also contains Rührzucker, which is, I'm not sure exactly what Rühr would be in this case, because it's usually Rühre is to like move, so it's some kind of sugar, so there'll be a bit of brew sugar in this one, obviously. So yeah, this I think should be really interesting. Let me just put that back down so that my OCD is happy. But as you could see, when this beer poured, it had a bit of finger of a bumpy big white head there. It is kind of creamy, in fact, actually. It's a sort of creamy colour, this one. But as you can see, the colour of this beer, the level of amber that you get in this is really impressive. Look at that. That is very, very nice, actually. A lovely kind of rich ambery colour to that. That's definitely more like a kind of West Coast IPA rather than anything else. But it's 7.7%. You know, this is the kind of colour that you would expect. So in terms of the colour of these beers, remember the colour of your beer is dependent on a couple of things. One, the type of malts that you use in the first place, and then two, the length of your wort boil. The longer you boil the wort, the more the sugar is caramelised, thus you get a darker beer. But there's also things like barrel aging and adjuncts adding adjuncts into the beer that can really affect that. So yeah, I do like learning little things like that about the beer, but in this case, you know, the barrel aging and the adjuncts aren't going to play a role. This one will be all about the wort boil and stuff, although in fairness there is that type of sugar in it, so if it's a darker sugar, that probably will account a little bit for the colour of this beer as well. But yeah, it is pretty clear, this one. It's got a little bit more of a kind of natural haze vibe to it. So yeah, one or two big bubbles sticking towards the side of the glass, a few little ones going up towards the bottom of that head there, but the head has faded away to be a very just thin foamy layer, and you've got a nice ring around the edge of the glass. So yeah, I like how this one goes about its business, actually. I do like how it goes about its business. So yeah, let's take a closer look at the aroma of this one and see how we get on. Nothing overly surprising about this beer when you consider what style of beer it is. You would expect this kind of appearance from an IPA, but it certainly looks like more of a kind of West Coaster, to be honest with you, than a hazy New England. Nothing wrong with that. I love a good West Coast IPA, but let's look at the aroma and see how we go. That's interesting. So this beer has a good little bit. First thing that comes out of it, it's got a good little bit of a kind of woody, earthy, yeasty sort of thing going on with it. But once your nose adjusts to it, you do get a fair wee bit of sweetness. So that's quite interesting. It's almost got a little bit of a kind of English IPA type vibe to it. So maybe it's an English IPA rather than an American one. But it's got a lot of American hops in it. You know, Citra, Mosaic, and Simcoe, all very, very well known. Citra, of course, 14% alpha acid, mangoes and citrus and things like that. Simcoe about 12%, that's a kind of passion fruity note you'll get out of this one. And then Mosaic is about 14% again, and that's a kind of tangerine orange note. So all quite high alpha acid hops. So I wonder if the Swedish variety in this case is being used as more of a bittering hop, actually, rather than an aroma and flavour hop. But yeah, the how would you say, the first thing, as I say, you'll get out of this beer is that it's actually quite a malty leaning IPA, but there's a good bit of yeasty influence in there as well. So you can smell some nice kind of woody characteristics forming the base of the beer. There's a good little bit of a kind of brown bready character coming out of this one as well. It's got a nice kind of wholemeal brown bready base to it. And then, you know, you can smell just a few other kind of grainy elements to it as well. So yeah, I think that's fair. Sort of grainy base, kind of wholemealy brown bready sort of thing sitting on top of that. A sweet caramel in there, a little bit of a toasted, sweet caramelly thing out of it. And then there's a good little bit of a kind of biscuity quality as well. But the more and more that I smell of this, the more it becomes more kind of wholemealy and grainy and things like that. So yeah, I do like how all of that pieces together in this one. The malt base has grown on me. When I first smelt it, I thought, it's a little bit, sort of too earthy and a little bit sort of well-fired and grainy and things. But as your nose adjusts to it, you do get more of the kind of breadiness and smoothness out of it. So yeah, this one is perhaps one that's going to open up a little bit more to you the more that you smell of it. But on the hoppy side of things then, which is where our focus should be, when it comes to IPAs. You do get a nice little bit of earthiness out of this one. The earthiness that you get out of this beer is a little bit noble. Mosaic can contribute a little bit of earthiness in my experience to the beer, but it doesn't smell like a Mosaic earthiness. It does smell like a more kind of German noble type earthiness out of this one. You know, Hallertau, Tettnanger, of course, Czech Sat, Slovenian Dana and Styrian Goldings and stuff like this. Polish Lubelski. It's got this kind of vibe about it. But yeah, it's got a really interesting just blend of things going on in here. The hoppy side of this beer is quite interesting for sure. But yeah, I do like how the aroma in this beer comes together. You've got the green component builds really well, but this beer, as I say, on the hoppy side of things, bit of earthiness, there's a little bit of herbal quality in there, some nice floral aromatic notes, and a good little bit of a kind of grassy character to it as well. So yeah, I really like how the green component in this one goes together. It's got quite a nice kind of laid back vibe about it, but I'm getting, you know, it smells to me quite malty, nice kind of grassy components to it as well, and the fruity notes I think are quite oily too. So I'm struggling to decide whether this one's more of a kind of English IPA or is it more of an American West Coaster. It might just be unique, to be honest with you. But yeah, the fruity side of this beer is quite interesting too, because you can really smell some of the grainy and bready notes mixing in with that. So there's definitely a good orangey presence for me, and that's the Mosaic that's going to give you that for sure. But you can smell a little bit of tropical fruit in behind that. There's a bit of an oily mango-y note, you know, there's maybe a wee touch of apricot or something like that. So yeah, there's a few interesting fruity notes coming out of this one. So I like how, you know, I do like how all of this pieces together. The aroma in this beer, I think, is just it's really quite quirky and quite unique compared to other things that I've had in recent times. So yeah, it's got a really, on the green component, as I say, it's got quite a noble type vibe going on with it, a little bit of earthiness, nice kind of little touch of herbal quality and some floral notes, and the fruits are really quite oily in this. So yeah, it's got a lot of English IPA type vibes to it, but then there's one or two American things in there as well. The brown sugary elements are definitely a bit more American, and some of the oiliness of the fruit is a little bit more American as well, to be honest with you. But yeah, just take a little bit of time and enjoy the aroma of this beer before you get stuck into it. But I think it's about time to taste this one, to be honest with you, because I'm just very curious about what it has. So yeah, this one is the Cigna Double IPA, 7.7% ABV from Torsöl Mikrobryggeri near Mariestad, next to Lake Vänern here in Sweden. Let's get stuck in. Slange, skål, cheers. That is quite interesting. It is quite unique, and it's actually quite similar to what you would expect based on the aroma, actually. Yeah, I do like this. I like this. It is different. Yeah, definitely it's different. But I think it is quite nicely done. It has got a wee bit of that Englishy IPA sort of vibe to it. It's quite a grainy leaning IPA, this one, I would say as well. Yeah, I mean, it's almost like you combine an English and American malt base in there with an English and American hoppiness. So yeah, it is almost like some kind of hybrid between an American West Coaster and an old school English IPA. But you know, I think, you know, it reminds me, actually, when I think about it, it reminds me of the India Tribute from Opigords. It really reminds me of that one a little bit. It has, you know, if you try some of the more old school beers from Opigords, that's what this beer really kind of reminds me of. I mean, Opigords in recent times have been putting out quite a few hazy IPAs and various other things, but this one really reminds me of you know, like their golden ale that they have, the Turbo Double IPA. It's got a little bit of this vibe about it, but it's a wee more kind of grainy and English, like the India Tribute beer that they did. That's what this beer reminds me of, is Opigords India Tribute. I can't remember, I think the India Tribute from them was about 7% or something, whereas this is a bit stronger than that, obviously. But yeah, this is quite an interesting beer. It's got a little bit of a, it has just got a little bit of that kind of old school type vibe about it. I think it really leans more towards being like an export English IPA. So yeah, this is quite an interesting find for sure, and this is why I do these the reviews of the small Swedish breweries. So yeah, let's try and break down this beer a little bit and see what we think of the flavour. So yeah, straight away with this beer then, you can feel that sort of, you know, grainy, brown bready quality, that blankets the middle of your tongue, absolutely. And I wonder, as I say, it's local. I think it's pretty local malts that they use. Either that, or it'll be the stuff from one of the different Swedish malteries. It probably is Swedish malt that's in this one, but yeah, it comes across as quite grainy in a lot of ways, so I can appreciate that. So you've got a nice kind of grainy base to the beer, you get a bit of a smoother kind of bready kind of thing sitting on top of this one as well, but again it's quite a sort of grainy brown bready element there. In the very centre of your palate you do get a bit of a straight up caramel to the beer, and as you move further out from that it's a little bit more kind of biscuity, like a McVitie's digestive biscuit. It's quite like that, but you will notice if you go to the front corners of your palate then move diagonally back, you get a little bit of a kind of woody, you get a little bit of a sort of woody undertone to the beer as well. So I really like how all of this pieces together. Yeah, I like the I do like how that woody quality in the beer comes together. It just adds another bit of depth to it as well. But yeah, I think that the malty side of this beer is quite straight shooting in a sense. Grainy undertones, definitely a grainy undertone, a smoother brown bready note on top of that, sweet caramel in the very centre of the palate, and then as you move further out from that, towards the edges of the palate, you'll get a more McVitie's digestive biscuity sort of thing. The brown sugars come across as being a little bit more kind of toasty the further you go into the aftertaste with the beer as well, but I think that covers the centre, the middle third of your palate fairly extensively with this one. So yeah, in terms of the hoppy side of things then, or well, so no, actually we should do the back third of the palate. As I always say, on that border region then, between middle and back third of your palate, you do get, there's a little bit of a kind of more concentrated grainy note there. It's got a bit of a toasty element, but then on the back third of your palate you can feel a teeny bit of that wheaty bitiness, and then you've got just a little bit of the more airy, yeasty kind of things on the back third of the palate. So on the back third of your palate you can feel those lighter flavours kind of fluffing out a wee bit, but then that kind of comes down and they sort of condense together before you move into the middle third of your palate. So yeah, be aware of that. This beer, there is a bit of a yeasty component there, and a little bit of a grainy and slight wheaty bitiness on the back third of your palate. So yeah, it's interesting how this goes together. Absolutely. Yeah, the malty side of this beer is quite interesting for sure. Definitely a bit of a West Coast kind of sweetness, if you like an American West Coast sweetness, but the backbone of the beer is I think unquestionably English, like an old school English IPA, India Tribute thing from Opie Gourds. It really does remind me of that. But yeah, on the hoppy side of things, I do suspect what's going on with this one is that they're using the Swedish hops as the bittering hops perhaps, and then the American hops will be the late addition hops. Remember, when it comes to hopping your beers, the early addition hops are the ones that are going to give you the bitterness, whereas, you know, as you progress through your wort boil, you've got a trade-off between bitterness in favour of flavour and aroma. A beer like this is going to have somewhere in the region of 70 to 90 minutes in the boil. So yeah, that's I think that the American hops will have been added a bit later on into that. But yeah, in the back corners of the palate you've got a nice little bit of earthiness there. The earthiness is a bit different, and again that's what makes me suspect that it's the Swedish hop, the Maurits 85, that's being used here as the bittering hop. But yeah, as you move further forward it develops a little bit of a herbal quality, and then it progressively becomes more kind of floral and aromatic as you reach the front corners of your palate, but then round the front curve of the tongue you've got a little bit of more of a kind of lighter you've got a little bit of a more sort of lighter grassy element to this one as well. There's a wee touch of a citrusy note coming out of the beer too, actually. Yeah, so the green component of this beer, I think, is goes together very nicely, actually. So yeah, a little bit of a wee citrusy vibe to this one, but yeah, I think the overwhelming components of the green side of the beer, floral notes and the earthiness, I think kind of goes in there as well, and the earthiness gives you a bit more, that's what makes it seem like a little bit more like an English IPA, to be honest with you. But yeah, let's focus on the fruity side of things then. So as I always say, on that front third of your palate, that's where you get that nice oily bubble where those juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. But on the border between front third and middle third of your palate, you can feel there's a little bit of a kind of brown bready sort of thing as well. So there's a nice sort of brown bready element coming out of this one. So you can feel there's a bit of a more toasty, bread crusty sort of thing, and then the base of that front third of your palate is a little bit sort of smoother and more kind of brown bready as well, but then everything else sits on top of that. So if you go towards the back of that front third of your palate, there is a wee bit of a stronger kind of passion fruity note there. That will come both from the Citra and the Simcoe in this case, but as you move further forward, it mellows out to be more sort of mango-like in a sense. So yeah, definitely a little bit more mango-like as you go further forward, but as you move into that front half of the front third of your tongue, it's got more of a kind of it has got more of a kind of tangerine orangey type vibe to it, although with the big caramelly malt base that this beer has, it comes across as a bit more oily. If I was tasting this beer blind, I probably would think there was a bit of Amarillo in this. In honesty, Amarillo gives you that more oily orange, whereas Mosaic's a bit more kind of light and tangerine, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think there's a few sort of citrusy vibes there as well. You do get a wee touch of lime just before you reach the very front edge of the palate there and the grassy components of the beer. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think this one is a really interesting and really well put together beer. So it gets a thumbs up from me. I think Torsöl Mikrobryggeri have produced an interesting beer here. It's got a good bit of an American West Coast character to it, but at the same time it's like an old school English IPA. So I like it. I do like this one. I'd be curious to see what their other beers are like as well. But yeah, in terms of the mouthfeel then, I think this beer is kind of top end to mid-bodied, bottom end to full-bodied. It's in that kind of region. The carbonation is very smooth. It's a sort of slick, oily and big slick beer. Actually, I can really appreciate that about this one. There's a good little bit of hoppy bitterness. There's a good little bit of hoppy bitterness comes out of this one, but this beer isn't going to blow the head off you in terms of bitterness. I mean, I think it's maybe about 40, maybe 50 IBUs at most. There is a wee bit more bitterness to this one, it feels, but not quite as big as you're going to get from some of the proper American West Coast IPAs, if that makes sense. But yeah, malty base is a bit grainy underneath. There's a good bit of sweetness develops out of it, a little bit of toastiness as well. Then you've got a nice oily, fruity character out of this one too. But I think that sums up the beer quite nicely. It's like an old school English IPA with a little bit of a kind of more modern American West Coast sweetness and fruitiness to it. I think that's probably a good summary of this one. And the Swedish hop is helping bring out some of the more English characteristics in this beer as well. The sort of earthiness and herbal qualities in the hops, which is quite interesting. So quite a few interesting points to be made about this beer for sure. But I think we should round off the review there. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Torsöl Mikrobryggeri. Hopefully we can return to these guys again at some point in the fairly near future. This beer's been a really interesting one to review. This is why I like reviewing beers from the very small and relatively unknown Swedish breweries. So if you do have any other recommendations for me to check out, let me know about those. in the comment section below. Thank you again for watching. Check out my social media, check out Torsöl Mikrobryggeri, and I'll catch you guys again very soon. This one was the Cigna Double IPA, 7.7% ABV from Torsöl Mikrobryggeri, just outside of Mariestad on the banks of Lake Vänern here in Sweden. Slange, skål, cheers, and catch you guys very soon.